think one of the things we need to all come to terms with is that there is a very critical economic imperative that's at work here. There is simply not as much money to spend on defense procurement as there has been historically. We're all going to need to figure out not only how to tighten our belts, but how to engage the model differently so that we can still provide the critical capabilities to our warfighter, but do it under an economic model that makes sense in today's environment. We can only do that if the defense industry is able to carry on business in a way for them that meets their responsibilities to their shareholders, but at the same time, we get what we need for our warfighters.
The importance of having open architectures and being interoperable is that in the end it saves you a lot of money. The thing is, however, that in order to make this possible, you have to invest first in creating and managing this approach for an open architecture and interoperability.
We were very encouraged to see a real commonality approach among the different organizations that are taking on interoperability. Several organizations were well represented, including the UCS program in the United States Department of Defense, as well as the GVA program here in the UK. And we all, I think, perceived that there was a great deal of commonality in terms of how those different organizations are really approaching the problem.
Well, I think open architecture is really about publishing of information. So essentially the architecture that's going to be used for some defence system is published in such a way that other providers, for instance, can either plug their own systems into the system that's being developed, or if it, depending on the degree of openness, could actually replace the system with another system and know enough about it in order to do that.
This is the new way of doing business in the 21st century. We are embraced with commercial rapid functionality in mobile phones, and we are trying to embrace that business model in a 30-year life cycle of weapon systems, and that requires new thinking from all the stakeholders about how to best position ourselves and share the limited resources or dollars we are going to have.
Well, I think the next challenge we really need to take on is to come to a better understanding of how we engage the industrial component to make sure that there's a viable path forward to them. I think from the government perspective, we have a very good understanding of what we're trying to accomplish, but I don't think we've really sorted out how we make this a win for industry. And as we look forward to where we go from here and the next conversation that we have, we really want to pull the industry into that conversation much more heavily and determine how we make this a win for them as well. This conference is a great example of where the conversation is happening. I think this conference has been very well attended on the government side, and again, we've had a lot of good discussion within the government communities of how we can make interoperability happen for them. But I think the next step is really to reach out to the industry side, pull them in, and make them a very important part of the conversation going forward.
Technically, I think there's a lot of convergence on how to do interoperable open architecture. And interestingly enough, it's a quick realization that the data is more important. So what I talk about is much more important than how I talk about it. Many presentations use the word data-centric, and I think until recently there wasn't a common definition or even a common understanding of what that is. And that's still converging. But fundamentally, the information, the content of what these systems produce and consume, and how we define that is the focus now, rather than the messages that I send you. I send you this packet, 3 seconds later you send me this packet back. So really focusing on the content of the system rather than the messages and the information flows in the system. And this enables a lot of portability and interoperability going forward. So as I evolve technology, I don't worry about the interaction patterns from previous generations of technology. I can more easily migrate how data is communicated on these new technologies as we go forward. I think the technical community needs to really begin to clearly define all of the non-functional requirements and what those terms mean. So interoperability, modularity, portability, pluggability, interoperability. I mean, all of these terms have very different meanings across every different community in every different country. It's not even within a single country, they don't mean the same thing. So until we can actually rigorously define what it is we're talking about, we're going to have a lot of conversations cross purposes. Modularity and interoperability, when you think about decomposing a system into a small functional block, you have to rigidly define what it does, what it needs to do its function, and what it produces as the output of its function. So a module, rigorous definition of a piece of a system's function, could be lifted out and put back in. Right? If those interfaces are proprietary, you don't have interoperability. If those interfaces are so obtuse in their definition, 3,000 messages in and some other combination of 7,000 messages out, you don't have interoperability. So modularity and interoperability go hand in hand.
This conference is a great example of where the conversation is happening. I think this conference has been very well attended on the government side, and again, we've had a lot of good discussion within the government communities of how we can make interoperability happen for them. But I think the next step is really to reach out to the industry side, pull them in, and make them a very important part of the conversation going forward.
Commercial and business acquisition rules and the technologies that support that acquisition policy are converging. Because as soon as you begin to think about buying interoperable open systems that are modular going forward, you have to then really think about what do I contractually mandate and how do I measure the quality of what I'm being delivered. So the technical side has to figure out where those boundaries exist and how to describe those boundaries, and the commercial side has to figure out how to mandate, procure, and measure those boundaries.
Until this event came about, I don't think we had a good sense of how the industry as a whole felt about these issues. So getting all of us together, frankly, people who had never met before or possibly never even heard of these other organizations, getting them all together in one room, carrying on a common conversation, and really seeing the degree of unanimity and confluence of issues felt very, very good, and it felt like we have an opportunity now to build some momentum so that we can take the next step forward.
Overall, I think this event is singularly unique in the convergence of all of the different thought leaders, opinions and ideas around the concepts of interoperability. It's been invaluable to see all the slightly different perspectives and gives the community a lot to think about as we kind of narrow down to a common set of definitions.
So we talked about a number of, I think, very important issues for the industry in the conference yesterday, and one of the things we, I think, really focused on was the process of how the industry goes about achieving interoperability. And I think one of the real useful insights was that the focus should really shift to what we would like to get out of the process as opposed to how we engage the process. More focus on how we, more focus on the objective that we're trying to achieve as opposed to the process through which we go about achieving the objective.